Okay, thank you, Peter. So some of you may know me, some of you may not. So I've worked with Peter for many years. I've worked with PLASA, I've worked with the MIA, and I work with members of both organisations. So I run my own HR consultancy. My businesses are small to medium businesses, so I understand the sort of issues that you guys face. So one of the things I want to talk about is immigration and right to work, and I'm also going to talk to you about what might change post-Brexit. I do want to have a disclaimer. There are several dates on my slides. They are subject to change. Dates have changed already this morning. Those of you who may not have looked at your phones will have seen that the EU have granted the extension with some flexibility in it. So when my next slide talks about 31st of October, we know that's probably not going to happen, but it will be somewhere before the end of January, unless anything changes. So my first point is, it's uncertain. We don't know exactly what the HR impact will be. What we do know, immigration will be impacted. The right to work checks that you do are going to become more important. We've got very used to it being easy to employ people from within the EU. We check their ID documents, they have a national insurance number, that's fine. These things are going to change. They will change after the transition period as well. And this will be under what's being talked about of a new points-based immigration system. There is a white paper out at the moment, but Boris, in his wisdom, has decided that he wants that re-looked at and wants to look more towards the Australian system. So what we will have post-Brexit, we don't actually know. And I think that's true for a lot of things that we talk about. We talk about what might happen in a no deal, what might happen under the deal. Until anything is done, we don't actually know. So immediately, if we leave on 31st of October, which we're now not going to, unless something dramatic happens, immigration-wise, nothing will change. ID documents, passports for EU nationals will still be valid proof of their right to work in the UK. However, there will need to be people applying for the settled status. So this is the scheme that the government has put in place for EU, EEA and Swiss citizens. So if they were in the country at the 31st of October this year, they can apply, or the date we leave under no deal. Again, these dates may change. They would have to apply for settled status. It is very simple. It's almost a 5-minute process for people to apply to get settled status. There are certain requirements, and if you don't qualify for settled status, most likely people will be able to qualify for what they call pre-settled status. And once they've reached the criteria, which is often around 5 years evidence of employment, they will be granted settled status. And that won't change. These are the current-ish dates. Again, they may change, so they're things you need to keep an eye on. However, the government has lots of information on their websites on this that you can look up. After we've left, there is going to be what's called a European Temporary Leave to Remain status. Again, deadline on there, possibly subject to change. The 31st of December 2020, at the moment, is the last day before the transition period ends. So that's why that date's on there. Any questions you've got around immigration and right to work before I move on to talk about what might change and what the impact of Brexit has already been? Few. I'm not an immigration expert, so I'm very glad there's no complicated questions. What I will say is if you've got people working in EU countries, you will need to check their individual rules to see what they need to do to remain in those countries. Okay, so we've talked already about the impact on the economy, we've talked about shortfall of drivers and warehouse staff, and there have been some stats from the CIPD, Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. Since June, when we had the referendum, I've missed the year off, but since June then, when we had the referendum, 95% fall in EU nationals joining the workforce in the UK. That's a massive decline. That has impacted a lot of industries, and there's actually a huge problem with recruitment at the moment. 67% of employers are experiencing a high proportion of hard-to-fill vacancies. And the number of applicants for jobs has also fallen. So in summer 2017, low-skilled jobs were attracting 24 applicants. That's now 15 in the summer of 2019. Medium-skilled jobs, applicants have dropped from 19 to 10, and for high-skilled jobs, applicants have dropped from 8 to 5. So that's quite a big problem that certain areas are experiencing. A lot of my clients are experiencing problems recruiting. They've had EU workers go back to somewhere their place of residence in the EU because of uncertainty, perception on how they feel they may be treated, and as Tim pointed out, due to the exchange rate and the value of their pound. Would any of you say, have you experienced problems recruiting since the referendum? Yeah, I don't have a magic solution. Sadly, I think you need to make your business look as attractive as possible to work in. But I think the uncertainty around Brexit is also impacting UK residents looking for new jobs, because they're thinking, well, I don't want to change my job because everything's a bit uncertain. I don't know what's happening with the economy. And if you've worked somewhere for less than 2 years, you're not going to get any redundancy pay. So why would you take that risk at the moment? Okay, so what's the impact of recruitment going forward? Are you going to be able to recruit EU citizens after Brexit? Yes, you are. Due to the points I've previously talked about under settled status and the European temporary working scheme, you will be able to recruit EU citizens. Post the transition period, we will have some immigration scheme that we don't know what it looks like yet, and there are some various thresholds in there that are causing businesses some concern, such as the salary of £30,000 a year. A lot of EU workers are actually over here working in jobs that aren't earning that. So how that is going to be overcome is being challenged at the moment. Proof of right to work. So how many of you in here employ people? How many of you do right to work checks on every single employee? You really need to make sure you do if you don't. These are really important. The fine for knowingly employing an illegal worker is £10,000. You don't want a £10,000 fine, and you don't want to be audited and inspected. So you need to make sure you're checking these. Currently, EU citizens can still prove this with their identity document, so their passport or their ID card. And there is no requirement to inform you or prove to you that they have settled status until the 1st of January 2021, the first day after the transition period is over. It's actually going to be discrimination if you ask them to prove it. Isn't that helpful? Because you can't ask them until it'll be too late if they haven't got it. So that's going to work really well. But I think it's worth saying you should be encouraging and supporting your employees in their applications and offering them some support and being able to point them in the right direction, but don't go around telling them they need to do it and they've got to prove it to you. Otherwise you could be at risk of some kind of discrimination claim. The other thing that is really, really useful is the government's online checking system, where you can get code from the individual, you type it into the government website, you put in your details, and it comes up and it tells you whether that person has the right to work in the UK. It also tells you if you will ever need to check it again. It tells you to print that off or keep an electronic copy of that page, and that is your statutory proof of that person having right to work in the UK. If you look at the guidelines and you look at evidencing documents of List A and List B, it can be very confusing. You've also got to check that the passport looks genuine. How many of us in the room are experts on telling whether a passport looks genuine? We're not. They put a lot of pressure on employers to check that. This scheme is free and gives you statutory protection. So there is, I see, no reasons why you wouldn't want to use it. Moving on to employment rights and what will change. Interestingly, and we'll have to wait and see where this goes, but under the current withdrawal agreement, there is no commitment whatsoever, it's silent on this, about protection of workers' rights. This doesn't say we will continue to operate within the EU rules, it doesn't say we won't change things. It gives total freedom on making changes. If there's no deal, that could be similar as well. Obviously, immediately when we leave, there will be no change, as there is the transition period, but it gives a lot of freedom to employers to be able to make changes going forward, depending on what the government does. And what will happen is going to depend on the government at the time. Oh, I've got a question, sorry.
Sorry, just going back to your last slide, where you said you can't ask them to prove that they've got right to work in the UK, but if they give you a number, you can check it. Are you allowed to ask for that number?
Yes, so you're not asking them to prove they've got settled status. So what you can't do is gather up all your EU workers and say, right, you all need to prove you've got settled status. What you can say and should say to every single employee is, can you prove you've got the right to work in the UK? Including people who are UK nationals. So that online checking system isn't checking they've got settled status, it will apply to anybody to check that they've got the right to work in the UK. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions before I move on? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so what might change? What do I think might change? And there's a disclaimer here, I have no influence, I have no government inside knowledge, and I have no conversations with the government on what they're going to put in place. There is a lot of speculation, and as I've said, it is going to depend who's in power at the time. So no one knows for sure. But my thoughts, based on my research and information from industry leading experts, are these are some of the areas that we will need to consider and look at. Working time regulations. We talked about working hours previously. The 48-hour maximum working week is something that a lot of people think may go post-Brexit. So that cap, unless people have opted out where they can't work more than 48 hours a week, averaged over a 17-week reference period, might go. Depending where you sit in there, what your political views are, you may see that as a good or a bad thing. Given we talked about the productivity and how we have the same productivity in France but with longer hours, that would only indicate that perhaps we may head towards more long hours, which arguably is probably not the way to go. Holiday pay. Those of you who have people who do different hours, work overtime, get commission, get special payments. You may have seen that how you calculate holiday pay has become very complicated. You used to be able to just calculate holiday pay based on someone's basic pay. That'd be simple, wouldn't it? You pay someone £15,000 a year, they have a week off, you don't adjust their pay. Where the issues came around was if you paid someone £15,000 a year, but then they could earn commission on top of that, of almost double that. So they were actually earning £30,000 a year, but for their holiday, you were only paying them their basic pay. So cases were brought around that, and there have been a lot of other cases around overtime and guaranteed payments. It's quite possible that that could all be unwound post-Brexit, and we could go back to just paying holiday pay on basic pay. Again, watch this space, see what happens afterwards. Travel time is another interesting area from the working time regulations. And various cases that saying when people are travelling, so if someone doesn't have a fixed place of work, they go to different places all of the time, the minute they leave their front door is classed as working time. However, you don't have to pay travel time, which gets very confusing trying to explain it to individuals that yes, that is working time, no, you don't get paid for it. It's quite likely that will change as well. The same with on-call time being deemed working time. Redundancy consultation periods is another thing that may change, where you're required to do collective redundancy consultations. Hopefully, as Roger said, we're going to avoid a recession, so hopefully we won't be needing to do many redundancies. But at the moment, if you were proposing to make 20 or more people redundant, you'd have to do collective redundancy consultation. There is a view that this could change and this could be moved so that it is only when it's over 100. So again, watch this space on that. Because although collective consultation is there for a reason, sometimes the duration of it makes it very stressful for the individuals involved with the uncertainty. Finally, everyone's favourite piece of employment legislation, TUPE, Transfer of Undertaking Protection of Employment Rights. This is a very complicated area, and if you are ever buying or selling all or part of a business, or you're doing a service change, so you've decided to change your cleaners, staff transfer with protection of their terms and conditions. And this protection has no end point. So someone who cheaply transferred into your organisation 15 years ago is still protected. And this prevents people what they call harmonisation terms and conditions. So currently you can end up with a lot of different employees and a lot of different contractual terms. So you're then having to check their contract every time you want to think about what you could do with that individual. There are some thoughts that the legislation would be changed to allow post-transfer harmonisation of terms and conditions, which could make things a lot easier for businesses. At the moment you can make changes in certain circumstances, but it is very difficult. And even if people agree to positive changes, that has still been found to be unenforceable under cheapy legislation. So hopefully, that change I think would be something that would be quite welcome to businesses. But my disclaimer on all of this is we will need to watch this space. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I thought it's useful to give you guys a view as to what may change in the future. Has anyone got any questions?
Do you think there'll be any change to how the UK actually deals with workers from other states rather than EU? Because we're having terrible trouble at the moment even gaining visas for employees. Like for example, we've got an Indian who works for us. He's fully approved to be in the UK, and at the moment we can't even send him to Dublin to work for us on an event because all the visa officers are just basically telling you to go away because they don't know what the hell's going on. If he was a tourist in the UK, he'd be allowed to travel to Dublin, but at the moment he can't go to Ireland, even though it's a common travel route that you technically don't even need identification to travel there. So it's just sort of a real minefield at the moment.
It is a real minefield, and I think it's hard to say because we did have the white paper out on the points-based immigration system, but that's subject to change. So in all honesty, I don't think it's going to get any easier. I don't think they're going to make it any easier. They might change some of the criteria. They have changed some of the tiers, but they're at the higher level. But certainly the white paper had a cap on people needed to be earning over £30,000 a year to cover on that new points-based scheme, which probably for you guys, a lot of people you employ aren't earning that. So how does that work? If you work in a warehouse, you're not earning that much money. So are you going to be able to qualify to come and work in the UK? I think they need to look at it, and I think they are re-looking at it, but I think we do need to make it easier to get people in to come and fill this massive recruitment shortfall that we've got in the country at the moment.
Well, the other difficulty is getting them out of the country if you have any other business to do while they work for you in the UK. Because at the moment, with the way it is, you can't necessarily get a Schengen business visa without there being a specific trip. So you try and get a Schengen visa for France, for example, they might give you a visa for the 2 days you request it. You ask for one for Spain, they might give you a Schengen business visa for 2 years for that person. And because all the visa services are contracted out, there's not really a way to even complain or get an answer from people. It's a nightmare at the moment.
No, I share your pain. I'm not an immigration expert, so I can't answer your questions, but I think absolutely, potentially it's just something that's going to become more difficult.
Thanks.
Any other questions? That's because I talked about cheapies and that sent you all to sleep.
I don't think so, no. Okay, I think we're actually at the end of our, if you want, our formal presentation. We have lunch arriving in about 10 minutes' time, and we encourage you to stay and chat and have some lunch. But before we officially close with all our presenters together, are there any questions that you've written down that you've really not put your hand up for because you think we might not be able to answer? Anything that you think that we have missed or doesn't apply, or something that you're going, I really need to know this, but I haven't asked the question yet. They can't be that good, surely. They can't be. Nobody's that good. There you go. You see, there's always one. There's always one. Here we go.
Sorry, what about reissuing employment contracts? Is that a case of waiting until new legislation's passed, or?
That's a $1 million question, that one, isn't it? Employment contracts are going to need to be looked at from April next year anyway, as there's employment law changes coming in. We don't have the full details on those. Apparently the government's been busy with something called Brexit, so they haven't finalised those. But contracts from the beginning of April next year need to be issued on day one. Currently you have 8 weeks to issue a contract, so certainly contracts need to be they need to be looked at. You need to make sure they're going to be compliant with the new requirements. And leaving the EU shouldn't affect employment contracts. If employment rights change, then the law supersedes what's in the contract anyway. So you don't need to issue a contract, just sometimes it's good practice to reissue them, because then you make sure everyone's on an up-to-date contract and clear on what their rights are.
I got a question. So if you've got somebody who is working, who's based in the UK but working in Europe right now, and they are on a tour, and it comes to the Brexit happens. What about will that person, when they're going from country to country, need a new work permit to work in that different location, whether they're working in Germany or working in the Czech Republic or working in Hungary or working wherever it is? Will they need to renew that work permit? And if they do, what kind of additional administrative time and energy is going to be given to the person organising the tour?
That's a very good question. I don't have a definitive answer to that. When I looked and do my research, basically it seems to be that it would depend on each individual country. So I think, yes, there's going to need to be a lot more preparation on tours of what people are going to need to do. It also depends what our agreement ends up being. If we end up in a no-deal Brexit, then I suspect it's going to be more difficult. If we end up with nice terms in the withdrawal agreement, then movement of labour may be different. So it's, I think, I'll watch this space and do some careful research.
Okay. And what about current? If any idea of when you're applying for a work permit, if one is needed, how long that might take?
No.
Right. Okay.
Sorry.
Because this could affect, quite certainly, it's going to affect a number of people in here, and I guess the unknowns continue to be unknown until somebody makes a decision somewhere along the line. And what we'll try to do from a PLASA point of view, and I'm sure from the Music Industries Association, is that we'll try to keep the links on our website as up to date as possible while we go through this process. Okay. One final rubber sheet. We've got another question. You see, always does.
I think it was Tim that maybe said about the exemption for music and television production within haulage. Is there a way to prove or show that you are within that thing? And is it a case of only TV production for television? Does corporate video production work in that? Does conferencing fit in there, or is it exemptions? Because like if you visit Russia or America, the difference between being a TV cameraman or being a corporate video producer is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, this is for the area that takes ECMT permit. If you want to speak to me afterwards, I can give you the full wording of the exemption. It covers all sorts of things like circuses and music and this kind of thing. Now, as far as that is concerned, we don't think it will come to that, because what is going on at the moment is trying to sort out bilateral agreements with the various countries. So there might be lots of, you might be going on as I see it, you might be going on a 7-country tour, and there'll be bilateral agreements with each individual country. So it'll just be, your haulier will just be covered. If you're a music business taking your own music stuff, or it's the haulage, third party haulage, that will be covered off in any event. And of course, as I've mentioned before, the big problem is the actual number of permits, because that number is never going to change in reality. So it's not regarded as being any kind of solution. But if there was a problem, ECMT permits could be used. Now, just coming back to your original point, from what I've read and understand about this, you would need to be able to have some kind of proof that that what you were taking on your tour was your own equipment, or sort of hired to you, if you like, for the purpose of the tour. And this is where we get into difficulties with merchandising, because as I understand it, if you go outside purely just taking your own stuff around, and you've got merchandising on the lorries, well, that's basically an export of stuff that's going to be sold. And merchandise is critical to music to it as I understand it, because that's where the profit is. But you are not within the exemption if you effectively got a mixed load, if I can put it that way. You know, your own.
I understand that what you're saying there. It's just a case of the classification as to whether you fit in an entertainment model or whether where corporate communication and other projects like that fits in the mix of it, really.
I've got it over there. I'll give you the exact wording. I've got another question. So, you're on tour and you have one of the products that you're using on tour breaks down.
Yes.
And you've got spare parts here in the UK.
Yeah.
And you go, right, I'll phone up head office and I'll get them to ship it in time the next when I get to Berlin or wherever it is.
Yeah.
And two questions. One is, let's say the product was actually designed and made in the UK, so it's a UK product, so it's a UK spare going from here to Europe. What happens to that? And second one is, if it's not a UK product, so let's say it was originally imported from mainland Europe to be sitting in a distribution centre here or in a rental house here, and then they got to ship it back to the mainland Europe to fix a piece of equipment. What happens to that?
Yeah, I think this may be. This is a customs issue. I think if
is that for you, Jackie?
If it's, I think if it's going out a like-for-like replacement, you'd want to be able to provide evidence that that's what's actually happening, and basically it's part of your, if you like, it's part of your original your equipment you'd be bringing back. How it would be treated from the customs point of view from the other country, because it's going out. How it would be treated would be a customs issue for the country that countries it's going into. So that would be my sort of pragmatic way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think our industry, the touring industry, do you think the touring industry has been thought out well enough? Because all of the text and the wording behind it is very much on import and export. But companies like ours and probably the guy over there, I'm sure is going to be impacted, and it's going to be the shows tonight. Well, we're very true. But in terms of what PLASA can maybe do, obviously it has been extended to January, are there certain things that we can do as an industry to try and get some better answers? Or like the operator's licence, is there something that you can apply that to the touring trade for a 6-month extension?
Well, I think as far as operator licensing is concerned, I think that is it's ultimately likely to be resolved one way or the other, because we can't contemplate a situation beyond July when vehicles will just grind to a halt. Yeah. As it was in the early part of 2019, when theoretically 90% of the international haulage fleet couldn't move. So I think it will actually be resolved by bilateral agreements or some other way of doing it within the agreement that's reached. So I don't think there's going to be a crisis. I think it is very problematic on the customs side. I had a conversation with somebody in this room, I don't mind saying, talking about antique guitars and types of wood. All this business about how that's going to be treated from the customs point of view. You've got these very quirky, odd scenarios that have got to be...
You've got CITES as well, which is a massive thing.
Yes. Yeah. But obviously, as far as membership is concerned, we'll try to help as much as possible to find solutions to these particular problem areas.
I can just see the operator's licence ticking the box for the trucking or the buses or trailers going through, but it's going to get caught up by the one of the 5 people that are from different nationality, or one bit of equipment's been subbed in from somewhere else, which brings everything to a halt.
Yes, and that's why, as I said at the outset of what I was saying, the one tip is that you absolutely have on board, customs advice, freight forwards, the best possible advice in those specialist areas, so that you've done everything you possibly can to make the first step in the link in the chain, to ensure that it's frictionless as far as reasonably possible further down the line.
Another question? And meanwhile, while we're doing this, anybody has a question for Roger or Jackie or Nicky, have a think?
Yeah, can I tell you the way it used to work? I've done from Michael Jackson to Motorhead, the Drive, and the Arctics and things like that. We used to have to clear every customs, Belgium, Germany, everyone like that. And the way that it works is you just turned up to the customs with a tour T-shirt, pushed it onto the counter, everything went through straight away, no problems. If you didn't do that, you could spend up to 8 hours waiting at the customs. So it was either a tour T-shirt, something like that. Yeah. Bizarrely, a packet of Marlboro cigarettes.
Which year was that?
Michael Jackson. Well, I did Michael Jackson, Pink Floyd, and all of them. Years, it was 20 years ago. When there was individual borders,
yes.
In every country. It surprised me actually when I did it a few years ago, where there was no borders. It was really strange driving through
so
without to stop.
Early 1990s.
All the way through, yeah, all the way through. So, as I say, you just need to give the custom guard a bum of some sort. And we were selling obviously merchandise, T-shirts. That was the most profitable thing, was the T-shirts, selling T-shirts. So as I say, just bung the customs guard, a T-shirt, and everything's fine. That's
okay.
not a problem.
I won't adopt that as formal legal advice.
No, it's not formal, but it's the way that it works. I think it still works now. Now, if you do it, if you go to Africa or anywhere else, you've just got to give them a bum, and that's it. Customs, no problem.
That's good advice, yeah. Bit of bribery. Right, okay. Any other final questions before we go out for lunch? No? Okay. Well, again, thank you very much indeed for taking your time out on a busy Monday. And by all means, enjoy lunch and have a conversation or whatever you need to do with our presenters. But for now, could I ask you to show your appreciation for Roger, for Tim, for Jackie, and for Nicky? Thank you very much.